Welcome to Use of Force Policy Training for Officers. This session will focus on understanding the guidelines for law enforcement accountability, emphasizing the critical aspects of the use of force policy. Gaining a clear understanding of these guidelines, definitions, and implications is essential for maintaining professionalism and accountability in law enforcement practices. In this training, we will cover an introduction to the use of force policy, key definitions, and policy guidelines. We will also discuss the use of force and deadly force, reporting and documentation requirements, medical considerations, how to deal with individuals with mental illness or diminished capacity, watch commander responsibilities, training requirements, and the analysis of use of force incidents. The introduction provides an overview of the purpose and scope of the use of force policy, as well as references to companion policies that support these guidelines. This policy outlines the necessary guidelines to ensure the reasonable use of force by division members. Members are expected to make decisions regarding the use of force with professionalism and impartiality, emphasizing an impartial and reasonable approach in the application of these guidelines. Several companion policies support the use of force policy. These include Policy 302 on handcuffing and restraints, Policy 303 on control devices and techniques, Policy 304 on conductive energy devices, Policy 305 addressing officer-involved shootings, and Policy 306 on firearms. Each provides specific guidelines for safe and appropriate conduct. Key definitions in this policy include serious physical harm, deadly force, imminent threat, active and passive resistance, and the concept of objectively reasonable actions. Understanding these definitions is foundational for proper application of the policy. Deadly force refers to any force that carries a substantial risk that it will result in the death of any person. This definition is grounded in legal statutes and outlines when such force may be deemed necessary. Force, as defined by policy, involves any violence, compulsion, or constraint physically exerted by any means upon or against a person or object. It includes the application of physical techniques or tactics in response to resistance. However, minor control techniques like handcuffing or escorting do not qualify as use of force under this policy. An imminent threat is a situation that is on the verge of occurring and could result in harm if not addressed. This includes situations where a subject possesses, or is attempting to gain access to a weapon, is armed and moving to gain tactical advantage, or has the capability to inflict serious harm even without a weapon. Active resistance involves physical, confrontational behavior intended to directly obstruct lawful efforts of law enforcement. Passive resistance, on the other hand, is characterized by nonviolent opposition, such as refusing to comply with legal requirements without direct confrontation. The necessity for using force, and the level of force used, is determined by the officer's evaluation of the situation in light of all circumstances at the time. Officers must consider what a reasonable officer would do in similar situations to ensure accountability and fairness. The policy guidelines include the general policy, certification standards, and a duty to intercede. These sections establish the framework for how force should be evaluated and applied. The division's policy emphasizes valuing and preserving human life. Officers must use only objectively reasonable force, considering alternatives and the specifics of each case. The Graham v. Connor Supreme Court case sets the standard for evaluating use of force, focusing on what a reasonable officer would do under the circumstances. This policy incorporates certification standards established by the Ohio Collaborative Law Enforcement Division. Specifically, it aligns with OCLEAC Standards 8.2015.1, which outline requirements for agency certification and accountability. Officers are required to observe the actions of others and recognize when force exceeds reasonable limits. When witnessing excessive force, officers must intercede to prevent further unreasonable actions and promptly report such observations to the appropriate authority. The use of force section addresses general provisions, de-escalation, use of force to effect an arrest, factors determining reasonableness, and the use of force to seize evidence. Officers must use only the necessary amount of force to achieve a lawful objective and ensure safety. Improvisation may be required in rapidly changing situations, but any improvised method must be reasonable. The primary goal is to minimize injury and avoid unnecessary confrontation. The degree of force used is determined by the subject's actions and follows the principle of force progression. Officers must escalate or de-escalate force based on the subject's compliance. Guidelines restrict the use of force on restrained individuals and prohibit choke holds unless deadly force is authorized. Medical care must be provided to injured individuals as soon as practical. De-escalation techniques help reduce tensions and avoid the use of force. Officers should apply de-escalation methods consistent with their training, and, when safe, allow individuals time to comply with verbal commands. Officers may use reasonable force during a lawful arrest to ensure compliance and safety, prevent escape, and overcome resistance. Officers are not required to retreat in the face of resistance when making an arrest. When deciding whether to use force, officers must consider several factors, including the immediacy and severity of the threat, the conduct of the individual, officer and subject characteristics, the environment, and other available options. The totality of these circumstances determines whether force is reasonable. Officers may use reasonable force to lawfully seize evidence and prevent its destruction. However, force should not be used solely to prevent swallowing evidence, and officers must avoid techniques that restrict blood flow or respiration. This section covers the authorization and justification for deadly force, as well as special considerations that must be taken into account before its use. Officers are authorized to use deadly force when it is objectively reasonable under the circumstances. Deadly force is justified in self-defense or defense of others from imminent threats, or to prevent escape of a subject suspected of a serious crime. Legal precedents such as Tennessee v. Garner and Graham v. Connor guide these decisions. Officers must avoid discharging firearms in situations that could endanger bystanders or hostages. Whenever feasible, officers should identify themselves and provide a warning before using deadly force. Deadly force should not be applied to individuals who pose a threat only to themselves or property. Firing at moving vehicles is only permitted when there is an immediate threat to life. Accurate reporting and documentation of use of force incidents are essential for accountability. This section details the requirements and procedures for reporting. After applying force, officers must notify the watch commander promptly and follow guidance on reporting. All incidents must be documented in a use of force report as soon as possible, including any use of less lethal weapons. Reports should be completed before the end of the officer's watch unless exceptional circumstances exist. Officers have specific responsibilities regarding medical care following any use of force incident. This section outlines those responsibilities. Officers must ensure that appropriate medical care is provided as soon as safe. Individuals showing signs of distress or unconsciousness must receive assistance before booking or release, and any refusal of medical attention must be documented. Officers must also communicate details of the force used to medical personnel. This section addresses the use of de-escalation techniques and the application of force when dealing with individuals who are mentally ill or have diminished capacity, as well as considerations during medical emergencies. Officers must recognize signs of mental illness or diminished capacity and use appropriate de-escalation techniques. A trained crisis intervention team officer can assist in these situations. If de-escalation fails, officers may use an objectively reasonable amount of force to resolve the incident. In medical emergencies, individuals may not be able to make rational decisions and could pose a serious threat. Officers may apply a reasonable amount of force to address immediate threats, even if no criminal behavior is present. The necessity of the force used depends on the circumstances. Watch commanders play a vital role in scene management, investigation, and ensuring compliance with policy following use of force incidents. The watch commander must ensure medical care is provided at the scene, maintain scene security, and collect evidence and witness statements. Proper documentation and reporting of all aspects of the investigation are essential. Bureau commanders must review all use of force incidents for compliance with policy and training needs. The Chief of Police reviews each case and can take corrective action, initiate investigations, or recommend policy revisions. Special procedures apply in cases of serious harm or death. Training is a key component of the use of force policy. Officers must receive policy training, annual training, and demonstrate proficiency in the use of force and related techniques. All officers must receive training and instructions on this policy before being authorized to use firearms or less lethal weapons. Officers are required to read and acknowledge the policy, and must complete annual training and testing to ensure understanding and compliance. Annual training provides updates on legal changes, emphasizes de-escalation, and simulates real-world force scenarios. Officers must demonstrate proficiency in firearms, less lethal weapons, and control techniques, with training conducted by certified instructors and fully documented. Use of force incidents are analyzed annually to identify trends, training needs, potential equipment improvements, and policy revision recommendations. The annual analysis aims to identify trends in the use of force, recommend training and equipment needs, and suggest policy revisions. This analysis is submitted to the Chief of Police to support fair and effective policing. In conclusion, understanding the use of force policy is essential for all officers. It provides a framework for responsible action and accountability, ensuring that law enforcement is conducted ethically and legally.